The deteriorating situation in Victoria has prompted Singapore to tighten entry restrictions on travellers from the Australian state. From midnight Sunday night, they'll have to serve stay-home notices at dedicated facilities instead of at home. The same restriction will apply to people arriving from Japan and Hong Kong. Now, Cheryl Goh joins us live for more on this story. Cheryl, tell us more about these new restrictions that have been outlined by the Multi-Ministry Task Force.
Yes, that's right, Steve. So it's precisely because of the spike or perhaps a resurgence in cases in these countries after they've started to reopen the state of Victoria in Australia, Japan, and Hong Kong, that the Ministry Task Force here has changed the stay-home notice for all travellers with a travel history to these three places, and also those who are in transit in Singapore, that they will no longer be able to serve their stay-home notice at home, but they have to do that at a dedicated government facility. And this is really also to minimize any risks of possible imported cases. For the broader travel advisory for Singaporeans, it remains the same, and that is really for Singaporeans to not to travel especially if it's non-essential travel for the time being. So what the task force is saying is that we are going to remain in this phase 2 for quite a while, and we won't be seeing any relaxations anytime soon. And Singaporeans must be prepared that life won't go back to the pre-circuit breaker days in the near future. However, they may consider some easing of certain measures. For instance, the number of people gathering in groups, which is currently about 5. So they may consider easing this number or increasing this number, especially if the community cases continue to remain under control. Now, the task force also said Singapore is studying these other countries that have reopened and seen a resurgence in cases on why there's a spike, and they've detected certain trends, for instance, night spots, as well as religious gatherings or even school gatherings. So these are places where the COVID infection could re-emerge, especially if safe distancing is not observed. And in Singapore, we've also noted that 7 in 10 of the unlinked cases reported so far are asymptomatic. And so the task force is really keeping a close watch on these numbers to ensure that it doesn't spiral out of control.
It is very hard to say, you have to limit to your contacts to a certain number of people, you have to keep wearing a mask every day, and you have to restrain from all the usual things that you would like to do. I can appreciate that there is a fair bit of fatigue out there, and this happens everywhere. But really, it comes down to all of us staying disciplined, being vigilant, and recognizing how real the risks are, even today.
Cheryl, did the task force say anything about the crowds that had gathered during last week's general election?
Well, I mean, they did acknowledge that some polling stations had pretty long queues, but they did reiterate that there was safe distancing observed even in these queues, and that long queues can really happen anywhere in the community, for instance, at hawker centers, not just as part of the general election. However, when asked about the large crowds that had gathered during certain GE celebrations, Mr. Lawrence Wong, he did acknowledge that the celebratory mood may have gotten the better of some Singaporeans who may have, for that moment, forgotten about safe distancing, and keeping that really safe, that distance apart from the next person, especially in such a large crowd. So he did say that the authorities may be able to identify some of these individuals and perhaps take them to task. But he also did note that the contact within this group of the crowd may not have been prolonged. So, and also that no amount of enforcement work can work if a country is actually going out to celebrate. They also gave an update on the foreign worker dorm situation, and they're saying that we are really in the final stretch. So 230,000 workers have already either proven to be recovered or tested virus-free. And this is out of about 300,000 workers. And so the focus initially had been on dorms with a lower prevalence of the virus, and most of the workers there have been cleared. And so now they are moving on to those with a slightly higher prevalence, which is where the bulk of the new cases that we see in the past weeks, it's where they are coming from. So, and we're expecting that the clearance of all workers in all dorms should happen quite soon, mid-August or earlier, and there is hope that they can then resume work safely. Back to you guys.
All right, many thanks for that. Cheryl Goh speaking to us.